The glittering chandeliers of the Blackwood Foundation and Charity Gala cast golden light on silk gowns, champagne flutes, and shallow laughter. Savannah Reed stood quietly near the back, tray in hand, dressed in the plain black and white uniform of a waitress. She didn't belong there, not with the millionaires and models floating past her, but she had rent to pay and twins to care for. But that night wasn't about her future. It was about the moment that changed everything. Elias Carter, young, magnetic, devastatingly handsome, stood near the grand staircase, unmoved by the praise being heaped on him. Billionaire real estate mogul at just 31, he had learned to smile through boredom, but then his eyes caught hers. Savannah wasn't like the women who usually chased him. She wasn't dripping in diamonds or draped on someone's arm. She was alone, quiet, composed, yet something in her eyes betrayed her. Pain, strength, a touch of sadness. When he asked for a glass of wine, their hands brushed. She flinched. He smirked. Nervous? Not at all, she replied, though her voice trembled. She had seen his face in magazines, on billboards. Never imagined she'd be this close, or that he'd still be watching her as she walked away. Later that night, as the music softened and the crowd thinned, Elias found her outside near the garden terrace. She was staring up at the stars, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. You hate it in there, he said. She turned slowly. How could you tell? Because I do too. Maybe it was the way his voice dropped. Maybe it was how she smiled then, honest, tired. Maybe it was the loneliness they both carried that drew them in. It was supposed to be one night. No last names, no promises, just two souls colliding under a sky too vast for dreams. The morning after, Savannah woke alone. No note, no goodbye, just silence and the faint scent of him on the pillow. She wrapped the hotel sheet around her and stood near the window, holding her breath, wondering if it had all been a mistake. But it wasn't. 3 weeks later, she vomited in the middle of a morning shift. Her manager barked at her to pull it together, but Savannah already knew. She was pregnant. At first, she was numb, then terrified, then determined. She tried to reach Elias, not for money, not for pity, but because he deserved to know. But his assistant coldly dismissed her. Mr. Carter doesn't take unsolicited calls. Email if it's business-related. She emailed. No reply. She mailed a letter. No answer. She even went to his office, only to be escorted out by security. He was a fortress, unreachable behind glass walls and polished smiles. She sat on the bus ride home, clutching her growing belly, tears sliding down her cheeks. Elias had forgotten her, but she would never forget him, not when she carried his children inside her. And yes, children. Because during her first ultrasound, the technician smiled and said softly, well, looks like there are 2 little heartbeats. Twins. Savannah laughed and cried all at once. She whispered their names before she ever saw their faces. Logan and Landon. She worked double shifts. She read parenting blogs during her breaks. She moved into a 1-bedroom rental with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors. But it was home. It was enough. And her boys? They were her everything. Meanwhile, miles away, Elias Carter continued living the life of the elite. Private jets, headlines, cold business deals. But he never forgot that night, not completely. He remembered her hair like wildfire, her lips trembling as he kissed them, her eyes deep, searching, but not her name. He had never asked. He assumed she had left like all the others. Women came and went. His life was built that way. That night had left a strange mark on him, but he buried it under work, under control. He didn't know. He didn't know that while he closed million-dollar deals, his sons were learning to crawl. While he hosted celebrity galas, Logan got his first fever and Landon learned to say, Mama. He didn't know that the woman he spent one night with was pouring her soul into raising the children he never knew existed. But fate is never blind. It watches, waits, and soon the carefully constructed walls Elias Carter lived behind would begin to crack. Because some memories don't fade, and some connections, especially the ones born of blood, can never be erased. 4 years had passed like the turn of a season, quietly, steadily, but not without hardship. Savannah Reed had long since left the glittering chaos of the city behind. She lived now in a peaceful Oregon town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were harder to keep. Her life was simple. The morning started with cereal spills, sticky fingers, and two wide-eyed boys giggling as they climbed into her bed. Logan loved dinosaurs. Landon loved space. Both loved their mama fiercely. Savannah had traded high heels and gala trays for a red checkered apron at Rosie's Diner. The pay wasn't much, but the people were kind, and every time she looked at her boys, she felt whole, even if there was a shadow of a man they'd never met. She never said his name. When curious neighbors asked, she smiled and said, "They have everything they need." But deep inside, late at night when the boys were asleep and the silence settled in, she sometimes whispered his name, Ilias. She wondered if he ever felt that emptiness too, if somewhere in his glass towers and luxury, he ever dreamed of the night he forgot. Then on a cold and rainy Tuesday, fate struck. The bell above the diner's door jingled softly. Savannah looked up from the counter, absently wiping a mug. Her heart didn't skip. Her breath didn't catch. Not yet. Elias Carter walked in, soaked from the storm, his dark coat dripping water onto the checkered floor. He had no idea where he was. A flat tire on the highway and a wrong turn brought him here. He only wanted coffee, warmth, but life had other plans. Savannah's hands froze. Her lips parted, her eyes widened. Time folded in on itself. He was still tall, still painfully handsome. His hair was longer now, damp curls falling over sharp blue eyes. But his presence was unmistakable. It pulled the air from her lungs. And yet, he didn't recognize her. He sat at a booth, shook off the rain, and glanced around absently. "Coffee, please," he muttered, not even lifting his gaze. Savannah stood rooted in place. He doesn't know me. But then the bell rang again, and two small hurricanes barreled into the diner. "Logan, wait for me!" Landon shouted, laughing. Two identical boys, blondish brown curls, dimpled cheeks, bright blue eyes. The same eyes that had once looked at her in the dark, full of desire. The same eyes staring up at Elias now. And then, everything stopped. Elias looked up. His eyes narrowed. Confusion flashed across his face, and then realization. He stared, first at the boys, then at Savannah. His breath caught. His hand trembled around the coffee cup he hadn't yet touched. "Those eyes," he whispered, voice rough. "Mine." Savannah couldn't speak. Her throat closed around the words she'd rehearsed 100 times, just in case this moment ever came. The boys didn't notice. They ran to her, Logan hugging her legs and asking for fries. Elias stood slowly. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one rising inside him. "They're mine, aren't they?" he asked again, louder this time, stepping closer. Savannah looked away, her heart thundering. She swallowed hard, but it was no use. The truth she'd buried for 4 years had risen to the surface. "Yes," she said softly, "they're yours." Elias staggered back like he'd been hit. His world, everything he knew, everything he believed, fractured in that instant. Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked with a mixture of anger and pain. "I tried," she said, her voice barely audible. "I called. I wrote. I even came to your office. Your assistant blocked me every time." He looked stunned. I didn't know. Savannah, I didn't even remember your name. That night, God, I didn't know what it meant until now." Her lips trembled. She wanted to be strong, to protect the life she'd built without him. But how could she guard her heart when he was standing right in front of her? Blue eyes filled with regret. "I didn't want to chase you," she whispered. "I didn't want your money or your pity. I just raised them. Alone." Elias looked at the boys again. They were now sharing a booth, playing with sugar packets and crayons from the counter. "My sons," he said in awe. He sat down heavily, running a hand over his face. The millionaire who'd built an empire looked suddenly small, human. Savannah poured his coffee quietly, placing it in front of him without a word. "I'm not leaving," he said. Her eyes met his, cautious, wary, but not without a flicker of old fire. "Don't make promises you don't understand," she warned. But Elias didn't look away. He couldn't, because in that diner, on a rainy Oregon evening, He hadn't just found the woman he'd once forgotten. He found the two reasons he could never walk away again. The storm outside had faded into a slow, steady drizzle, but inside Rosie's diner, thunder still rumbled between Elias and Savannah. Elias couldn't take his eyes off the twins. Every laugh, every little tilt of their head, every blink. It was like looking in a mirror. It was undeniable. Yet his mind rebelled against the truth. 4 years. 4 entire years of their lives, gone. Lost to him. He stood outside the diner after Savannah clocked out, following her to the car. He didn't ask if she wanted to talk. He needed to. "We need to talk," he said, the edge in his voice cutting like glass. Savannah paused, her hand on the door of her rusted-out minivan. "We did talk." "No," he snapped. "You told me I have kids and I'm just supposed to accept it like a footnote?" Savannah turned slowly, her expression calm, but her eyes blazing. "What more do you want, Elias? I gave you the truth." Finally, he took a step closer, jaw clenched. "Why didn't you try harder? Why didn't you make sure I knew?" Savannah's breath caught in her throat. Pain flickered across her features, but she refused to flinch. "I called," she said slowly. "I left voicemails. I emailed. I even mailed a letter. Handwritten. You know how many times I stood outside your office, hoping someone, anyone, would let me in?" Elias blinked, stunned. "My assistant, she told me you weren't interested in scandals, that if I had trapped you with a baby, there were lawyers for that. She made me feel like trash." Elias stepped back, shaken. His world, the one carefully curated with meetings, stock charts, and endless control, was unraveling by the second. "I didn't know," he muttered almost to himself. "You didn't care to know," Savannah corrected, voice tight. "You vanished after that night, Elias. No last name, no contact info. Just a one-night stand in $1,000 tux." Her words slapped him harder than she realized. That night, that damn gala. He remembered her dress, the way it shimmered like stardust, her laugh, unguarded and real. He had been drawn to her because she didn't fawn over him like the others. And then he'd let her go, forgotten her name, chose business over memory. "You don't get to be angry at me," Savannah added, her voice cracking now. "I carried your children while working double shifts, eating leftovers off diner plates to save money. I fought postpartum depression in a dark apartment with no help. I was drowning while you were building another luxury condo." Elias looked gutted. He had always prided himself on his discipline, his iron grip over life. But he hadn't seen, hadn't known. And now it was too late to go back. I didn't know what I was missing," he murmured, almost to himself. Savannah scoffed softly. "And yet, I never let them miss you. I told them you were working somewhere far, doing important things. I let them believe they were loved, even when I felt abandoned." Her voice shook with fury and love all at once. A mother's torment etched in every word. Elias opened his mouth, but there were no words, none that could heal the damage, none that could fill 4 years of silence. He left without another word, retreating to his sleek hotel room on the edge of town. It felt hollow now, cold, like a cage built of polished glass and steel. He sat at the desk, dragging out his laptop and a small leather-bound notebook from his briefcase. Inside was an old photograph, one he kept by accident, one taken the night of the gala. Savannah was in the background, blurry and unposed, pouring champagne at a corner table. But her eyes, even frozen in time, they pierced him. She had looked at him like he was more than a billionaire, like he was human. Now he felt like a ghost. His hand trembled as he set the photo down. His empire meant nothing. Not when he had missed his son's first steps, their first words, their birthdays. Not when Savannah had faced every fear alone. The rage he felt wasn't at her anymore. It was at himself, at the system he'd built to protect himself from emotion, vulnerability, responsibility. He had filtered his world through walls of assistance and protocols, and in doing so, he had filtered out his family. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, hearing Savannah's voice over and over. "I had to fight to survive. Alone. With your sons." Each word was a dagger. But Elias Carter didn't back down from pain. He rose from bed at dawn with a single mission: to make things right, even if she never forgave him, even if the boys never called him Dad. He wasn't walking away this time. Elias Carter wasn't used to staying in one place. His life had always been a blur of airports, boardrooms, and penthouses. But something about the small Oregon town, its quiet roads, the scent of pine in the air, the way the sunrise lit up the hills, called him to pause. No, someone called him to pause. He extended his stay quietly without announcement. To avoid unwanted press and curious stares, he purchased the local motel under a silent LLC. The woman who ran it, a kind widow named Martha, had no idea he was a billionaire. She just liked that he helped her fix the porch swing. His reason for staying, however, was two pairs of bright blue eyes. Landon and Logan. The first few times he showed up at the park where Savannah brought the boys, they stayed close to her, eyes wide with confusion. Logan asked bluntly, "Are you a stranger or a superhero?" Elias had chuckled nervously, unsure how to answer, but he kept showing up. He brought model airplanes one afternoon. On another, he tried his hand at juggling apples, failing miserably and earning a burst of giggles from the boys. Slowly, he became less of a stranger, less of a mystery, and more of a curiosity. Savannah watched from the picnic table every day, arms crossed over her chest, expression unreadable. She hated herself for the way her chest tightened whenever Elias laughed, how her fingers tingled when their hands brushed as he handed her a juice box, how seeing him kneeling in the grass with their sons awakened something old and buried inside her. But trust wasn't easy to grow when it had been scorched. Still, he kept coming. He learned Landon liked dinosaurs and Logan loved outer space. He learned to tell their voices apart and noticed that Logan crinkled his nose when he was thinking. He memorized their routines, their quirks, their favorite snacks. Then came the night everything changed. It began with a fever. Landon had been unusually quiet all day. Savannah noticed at first how he clung to her side, his forehead warm, his eyes dimmer than usual. By midnight, he was burning up. She didn't hesitate. She bundled him in blankets and drove him to the tiny local hospital, Logan asleep in the back seat. But as she rushed through the emergency room doors, she nearly ran into Elias, already there, as if fate had summoned him. "I saw your car speed by," he explained breathlessly. "Thought something was wrong." For once, Savannah didn't argue. They stayed together in the sterile hospital room, Savannah pacing, Elias sitting cross-legged on the floor, with Landon curled against his chest. "Tell me a story," Landon whispered weakly. Elias's voice cracked as he launched into a clumsy tale about a brave knight and a fire-breathing dragon. When Landon's breathing slowed, he hummed a lullaby, one he barely remembered from his own childhood. Savannah stood outside the glass door watching. The weight of the past pressed hard on her shoulders. She saw Elias wipe away tears he thought no one could see, saw him kiss Landon's forehead with such reverence it made her heart ache. It wasn't just guilt on his face, it was love. Raw, unfiltered love. A kind of love that couldn't be faked. Morning came, and the fever finally broke. Landon opened his eyes and murmured, "Daddy stayed." Elias's heart shattered at the word. So did Savannah's, but for a different reason. Later, while the nurse took the twins for checkups, Savannah stepped onto the hospital balcony for air. Elias followed, keeping a respectful distance. "You didn't have to stay," she said quietly. "I wanted to stay," he replied. She looked at him, not as the billionaire who left her, not as the mistake of her past, but as the man who read bedtime stories to a sick little boy and cried in the dark when no one watched. "You're good with them," she admitted, surprising even herself. "They make me want to be better," Elias said simply. A long silence settled between them. The rain had returned, gentle and soft. It tapped against the railing like a heartbeat. "I don't know if I can trust this, Elias," Savannah whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I've built walls so high I don't remember what it's like to let someone in." "I won't ask you to trust me," he said. "I'll just keep showing up, every day, until maybe you see the man I want to be." She met his eyes. For the first time in 4 years, there was no anger there, only sorrow and a glimmer of something dangerous. Hope. Elias had been different since that night in the hospital. His presence was steady, but there was a lingering tension around him, something he wasn't saying. Savannah could feel it, like a weight hanging in the air whenever they were together. He had opened up, yes, but the shadows in his eyes told her that there was something more, something he hadn't shared. One morning when the twins were playing outside, Savannah noticed Elias leave the house early. She hadn't seen him this time with any clear purpose, just a quiet exit, as though he was sneaking away. Her instincts flared. Something was off. She decided to follow him. The winding country roads led her to the outskirts of town, where a thick row of trees shielded an empty stretch of land. As she pulled her car into a discreet spot behind a cluster of bushes, her heart began to race. Elias was standing near the edge of a plot, staring out at the nothingness. She saw the workers, the construction machinery, the initial foundation being poured. The realization hit her like a slap. Elias wasn't just here for a quick visit. He was building something. But what? Her feet moved on their own. Savannah crossed the distance, her breath shallow as she approached him from behind. She knew this moment would change everything. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. "Elias," she called softly, stepping into his line of sight. He turned, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it vanished. He wiped his hands on his jeans and met her gaze. There was something in his eyes now, a certain vulnerability that had always been hidden, even in the tender moments they'd shared. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice steady but not quite convincing. She didn't need to ask again. She already knew the answer. "What is this, Elias?" His jaw clenched. He hesitated. Then, as if the weight of his secret had finally become too much, he sighed and took a step forward, closing the space between them. "It's for you. And the boys. A home." Her heart lurched, the words hanging in the air like a prayer she wasn't ready to hear. "A home? I... I know I don't deserve a second chance," he continued, his voice raw. "But I need you to know this is real. Everything I've been doing, it's for you. I'll work for it. I'll earn it, if you'll let me." Savannah stood there frozen, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions. The anger and hurt of the past collided with the glimmer of hope he was offering her now. A home, a future? For the first time in years, the idea of something permanent, something real, felt like a possibility. But just as she began to soften, to consider the possibility of letting him back into her life, the sound of an engine interrupted her thoughts. A sleek black car rolled down the dirt road toward them, its tires crunching on the gravel. Savannah's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the driver. It was a woman, tall, impeccably dressed, her platinum blonde hair catching the sunlight as she stepped out of the car. Elias stiffened beside her, his expression instantly hardening. "Camille," he muttered under his breath, the name sending a chill through Savannah's veins. The woman, Camille Sterling, walked toward them with purposeful steps, her smile tight and full of expectation. She stopped just a few feet away, her gaze flicking from Elias to Savannah with a subtle hint of disdain. "Well, well," Camille said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a pleasant surprise. I wasn't expecting to find you here." Savannah felt her pulse quicken, a tightness settling in her chest. She hadn't seen this woman before, but she already knew who she was, Elias's ex-fiancée, the one he had left behind, the one he had promised to marry. Elias, visibly tense, moved closer to Savannah, his hand almost brushing hers, but he didn't take it. "Camille, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to see if there's any chance of you finally finishing what we started," Camille replied, her eyes cold and calculating. "I think we both know you've been stringing me along long enough. It's time to put an end to this little fantasy of yours." Savannah's stomach churned. She glanced up at Elias, who was avoiding her gaze now. The man who had promised her a future was suddenly distant, his past rushing back into the present like a tidal wave. Camille's eyes flicked to Savannah one more time, as if appraising her. "Oh, I see you've already met. The new woman in Elias's life. How quaint." The words cut through the air like glass. Savannah could feel her entire world shattering around her, the fragile trust she had begun to build crumbling with every second Camille stood in front of them. Elias looked at her, his face pale, his guilt written all over him. "Savannah," he began, but his voice trailed off. What could he say now? What could he offer her when the ghosts of his past were standing right in front of them? The quiet in the air was suffocating, the promise of a new life slipping further away as Camille smirked, clearly enjoying the tension. Savannah's heart slammed against her ribs. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the return of his ex or the realization that Elias hadn't fully left her past behind. As Camille turned to Elias, Savannah stepped back, suddenly too small in the vastness of the moment. And in that instant, everything seemed to unravel, right in front of her. Camille's presence lingered like an uninvited storm. With every word she spoke, Savannah could feel the venom creeping into her veins, each syllable a reminder of the past Elias hadn't fully escaped. Camille was elegant, impossibly poised, but her ruthlessness was evident in her every movement, her every sneer. "You'll never belong in his world," Camille hissed, her voice dripping with disdain as she looked Savannah up and down. "You're just the girl who got lucky. This, this is where you stop." Savannah stood her ground, but inside the words cut deeper than she was willing to admit. She was used to being underestimated. She had spent years fighting to survive, to raise her boys alone. But now with Elias's ex-fiancée here, she felt like a mere shadow of a woman who didn't belong in his life. Before Savannah could respond, Camille smirked, turning on her heel and leaving as abruptly as she had arrived. The encounter left Savannah shaken, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Elias hadn't spoken about Camille in years, but the way he'd acted, so distant and cold, made it seem like there were still unresolved feelings. That night, as she overheard Elias on the phone in the other room, a sense of dread took hold of her. He was speaking to his lawyer, discussing assets, protecting what he had, what was his. Savannah's heart sank. So this was it. All the promises, all the tender moments. They were just empty words. Her breath caught in her throat as she silently backed away, retreating into the bedroom. The pain was unbearable. He had been so careful to hide it, but now she saw it clearly. He didn't trust her. Not really, he was just protecting his empire. The man she had allowed herself to believe in, the man who had promised her a future, was still the same man who saw her as nothing more than a moment of weakness. The decision was made before she even had time to think it through. She packed her bags quickly, her hands trembling as she shoved her things into a suitcase. The weight of the finality of it all crushed her chest. Elias would never understand. She couldn't be a part of his world. Not like this. She closed the door softly behind her, leaving the house that had never really been hers in the first place. Later that evening, Elias returned home to find the house empty. He called out her name, but there was no answer. Panic gripped him. He ran through the rooms, and when he reached the bedroom, his heart stopped. There she was, standing by the door, her back to him, suitcase in hand. "Savannah, what are you doing?" His voice was filled with desperation, but Savannah refused to look at him. She couldn't look at him anymore, not after hearing the coldness in his conversation, not after everything Camille had said. "You can visit the boys," she said quietly, her voice breaking, "but I won't be bought, and I won't be pitied." Elias's expression shattered, his world crumbling around him. "Savannah," he said, voice hoarse with emotion, "I never wanted to buy you. I, I'm not asking you to stay because of money or pity. I'm asking because I love you, I need you, and I'm begging you. Please be my wife." His words hit her like a tidal wave. But as she turned to face him, all she saw was the man who had betrayed her trust, the man who had let the shadow of his past control his decisions. "I can't," she whispered, the finality in her voice echoing in the silence. "I'm sorry." And with that, she walked away, leaving Elias kneeling in the emptiness of the room, broken, lost, and desperate to undo the damage that had been done. Weeks drifted by, each one heavier than the last. Elias had disappeared. No phone calls, no texts, no visits. Savannah watched as the emptiness crept into their home. The twins, Landon and Logan, asked daily where their father was, their innocent eyes filled with confusion. And every time Savannah had no answer. She told herself she didn't miss him, that she had made the right choice. But deep inside, the ache grew. It wasn't the wealth or the extravagant lifestyle. It was the way Elias had sat by their bedside, reading them stories, laughing with them, and caring for them in a way no one had ever cared for her. He hadn't just been a millionaire. He had been the kind of man she never thought she deserved. One morning, as the sun barely peeked over the horizon, Savannah opened her mailbox. Among the bills and junk mail, there was a single note, folded carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. "I've left the city. I'm not running. I'm waiting. When you're ready, come home. If that home is me." The words punched her in the chest. She had been expecting something like this, but reading it felt like a slap of reality. He wasn't giving up. He was waiting. Savannah didn't hesitate. She gathered the twins, and despite every ounce of hesitation in her body, she drove them toward the edge of the land Elias had bought. As they pulled up, she saw him standing there, tall, still, and waiting. His blue eyes were wide with shock, his posture tense, as if he wasn't sure whether this was real. The twins saw him first. Landon and Logan didn't hesitate for a moment, running toward him, calling out his name with all the joy they had been holding in their hearts. Elias knelt down, eyes brimming with emotion, as he caught them in his arms, hugging them as if he'd never let go. Savannah stood there for a moment, her heart hammering in her chest. The storm inside her had finally quieted, and all she could hear now was the sound of her own breath, the beat of her heart, each one matching Elias's, calling her back to the place she knew she belonged. She took a slow step forward, then another, and this time, when Elias looked up at her, she didn't walk away.